Good evening, everybody, and welcome. It's great to see you all here. My name is Richard Davies, and I'm an economist based here at the LSE. I'm delighted to be chairing this important event this evening. I have some exciting announcements to start with. The first one is phones. Please turn your phones off, put them on silent. I haven't even done that yet, and I'm chairing the event. It's on silent now. The reason to ask you to do that is that the event is being recorded and will hopefully be made available as a podcast and a video. Q&A, there's a chance for Q&A midway through the event. I'll get to you as soon as possible. Some of you have already sent me questions, which I've fed into mine, so thank you for that. But do start thinking of your questions now. And there's also an online Q&A. So for those of you that are online, please get your questions in and they will appear on this iPad in front of me. So why are we here? Britain's economy is stagnant. Productivity growth stalled with the great financial crisis, now over 15 years ago. Real wages, so that's pay adjusted for inflation, are essentially flat. They're up, I checked it, they're up 4% over 18 years. It's a tiny fraction each year. Youth unemployment, we have 1 million people between 16 and 24 currently not in education, work or training. So how can we get past these problems as a nation? One idea is devolution, putting the economic decision-making powers down to a more local level. Perhaps the simplest example of this globally is just the USA. The growth performance there is far better. The individual states have their own approach, minimum wages, taxation. All those things are very different when you live in, whether you live in California or whether you live in Texas. Closer to home, in Germany, a much more locally devolved nation. And even closer to home, our own work here at the LSE Growth Lab, you should have been given a nice bookmark when you came in. I hope you got given that. If you follow that link, you can find your way to our work. And we've found that in towns and cities from Lyon in France to Wyoming in the US, to Bilbao in the Basque region, local places are coming up as new sources of ideas. Against this, of course, there are other arguments. We can't get away from the fact that we live in worrying times, not least over the past 48 hours. Defense, stability, these kinds of things have come to the fore. Perhaps we need even bigger nations when the world is becoming so threatened in a geopolitical sense. So these questions and more are brought into really sharp focus by looming elections in the UK. On the 7th of May, the UK goes to the polls in Scotland, in Wales, in cities and councils across England. And at every level, from the nation states to new powers for mayors, more devolution is being asked for. So how should it work and what are the risks? To answer these questions, I'm joined by an expert panel. Closest to me, we have Chelsea Pinches-Burrowes. Chelsea's a Cardiff-based entrepreneur. She's founder of the WCS agency and the owner of both Cardiff Life magazine and Cardiff Life Awards. These started at her own kitchen table, I believe, and have gone on to win multiple awards and become one of the best-known publishing collectives in Wales. Next to her, we have Rhun ap Iorwerth. He is the leader of Plaid Cymru, the party of Wales. Before politics, Rhun, like me before academia, was a journalist. We will not hold that against him. Good journalism can really clarify the world. He was BBC Wales's chief political correspondent. He's now leading Plaid Cymru, as I said, into this important election in just 2 months' time. Next along the line, we have Lorena López de Lacalle. She is president of the European Free Alliance Group. This represents the interests of small parties all across Europe. People have different things they're pushing for, but all of the parties in EFA want more independence, some form of sovereignty or devolution for their region. A skilled linguist, she worked as a translator and an interpreter, including for NATO. I was watching some translation the other day with what's going on in Iran, and I thought that is high stakes translation right there. So I take my hat off to you for doing that. And she's also been a minister. She was a minister for culture and the Basque language and sport. And to round it off at the end, friend and colleague Graeme Roy. He is an economics professor at Glasgow. Together with me and lots of other people across the UK, he helped found and was a really important founding member of the Economics Observatory, which we set up in 2020. He's currently chair of the Scottish Fiscal Commission and worked too in government, serving as head of the First Minister's Policy Unit. So it's my job to say welcome to the panel and to welcome to all of you to the LSE this evening. Thank you. I'll sit down now. Okay, so I haven't told the panel about this, but I always like to do an icebreaker. So get ready, panel. And I'm going to start with you, Chelsea. When I think of Scotland and Wales and the Basque region, I kind of think of food. So half a minute, what's your favourite Welsh or regional dish that you would recommend to the crowd?
I feel like there's only one answer, and I'm gonna steal for you too. But Welsh cakes. Breakfast, lunch, or dinner. You would say it's a dessert, but I would eat it as any meal. Yeah, it's very, very simple answer. If you can get them warm, even better, or gooey, absolutely. But as for a dish, no, just give me Welsh cakes all day long. My husband actually went to the shop yesterday to get some because it was St. David's Day, and they were all sold out. Yeah, I didn't have Welsh
big debate over whether they're better in Swansea or Cardiff market, but we'll leave the arguments to the side. And also, whether is it possible to have one Welsh cake?
No,
you have to have two.
Well, the Welsh mam is very well loved by us, so it has to be mam's Sunday lunch, and I had one yesterday, which has passed on from generation to generation. Now it's my daughter cooking mam's Sunday lunch for her dad, and she's in the audience tonight. So, thanks for the Sunday lunch.
Get the recipe later. Lorena,
my favorite dish, well, being a Basque, fish, all fishes, of course, but pinchos, we have those little portions that we eat in bars, and we go from one to the next. And not because of the fact that we are eating, but being together. For us, it's very important to be together and to work in teams and to enjoy life. So that's the part that I most like.
Lovely, thank you. Graeme?
Scotland, without doubt, square sausage. Yeah, so I don't know why sausages everywhere else are not square. So yes, without question.
Is that called lawn?
Yes.
Yeah, lawn. Yeah, I've had lawn. It's damn good. Okay, now we will move on to the economy. This is London School of Economics. We're not talking about square sausages. We're talking about how to reform the economy. Chelsea, all the things we need, more innovation, better pay, good working conditions, all of those things happen inside firms. So if I could start with you, could you give us a brief picture of the businesses you've set up? And in doing that, let us know what the big challenges are.
So I run an advertising agency that works with hundreds, if not nearly in the thousands of businesses every single year. And I always say that marketing budgets are a real temperature check for whether businesses are growing and scaling and investing in the growth of their companies, or if they are going into survival mode and retreating and going backwards. We sit smack bang in the middle, and it's our budgets that always get cut first. So we really are that first line of defense on what is going on. And starting the agency, I was really forced very quickly to understand what was going on around me and how that would affect our own pipeline. If the pipeline is empty, it means that businesses are struggling, and why are they struggling? So we hear that all I can talk about is what I see every day from our clients. Overheads are growing. Talent, especially in Wales, is being driven out of Wales. The overheads are too high. Taxes are too high. But luckily in Wales, there's this really deep-rooted sense of resilience. And no matter kind of how tough it is, people tend to kind of get stuck in and carry on. But especially in Wales, there's lots of SMEs. There's lots of family-owned businesses. There's lots of entrepreneurs, and there's that real collegiate spirit to keep going, but also definitely that times are harder. Me and my team talk a lot about how it's much harder to win a client now than it was 8 years ago when we started, based on lots of different reasons why. But I don't know if that answers your question, but it's kind of that mighty four around business overheads, talent, taxes, and more of the same, really.
Thank you. Graeme, I'm going to jump down to you because I read a recent report, January, that said that Scotland's startup economy, so the number of small firms, has actually been growing quite quickly. Can you give us a picture of the policy setup and what's been going on in Scotland in terms of businesses and dynamism?
Yeah, so Scotland's an interesting case study in that Scotland's economy, if you compare it to other regions or other countries within the UK, typically comes in third behind London and the southeast. But one of the long-term weaknesses we've had is a dynamic business base, particularly getting companies from startup into scale. So in some ways, we've done really quite well at getting lots of businesses to start up. There's various policy levers they've pulled. So we kept our 2 regional enterprise agencies when they were abolished in the rest of the UK. So Scottish Enterprise, Helens Islands Enterprise, and created a new one in the south of Scotland. And they have a particular focus about trying to set up supportive policies to set up businesses. But the key challenge is how do you get them to scale up? And I guess that's a problem with a small economy. When you get to scale and big capital comes in, then the market looks much better somewhere else. So the real challenge is how do you get that stickiness in the business base, to the point where you get just to the point where you're through your second or third cycle of growth. That's the bit that's always been quite challenging in Scotland.
Okay, that's interesting. We're going to come on to some of the inputs, I hope, to businesses, in particular skills, but also capital, bank loans, and so on. But Rhun, moving on to you, as I said, I did ask the audience to send in questions, and quite a few people did. Maybe as a kind of indicator of what might be coming in Wales, and because of the elections coming up, a few people said, you've got to ask them about their plan, you've got to ask them about their plan. Now, to be fair, I know you've put out 2 economic plans. There was Making Wales Work, which is a big sort of in-depth document. And then a few days ago, much broader in the economy, you put out a plan for the first 100 days. But can you give us your kind of headline sales pitch, set of ideas on businesses, dynamism, growth?
Well, there are a number of elements that we could touch on, and listening to Graeme there, many of the problems that Scotland has, Wales has too, but at an even greater level of depth. We don't have an issue with entrepreneurs. We have enough of them. As Chelsea said, it's a matter of how we support them to go past those initial difficult years, how we then persuade them to grow, and how we build an economy that encourages and allows businesses to stay in Welsh ownership. There's a statistic I was looking at between 2010 and 17, when businesses changed hands, businesses were sold and so on, 53% of them were sold to new owners outside Wales. Now, that issue of ownership is a big problem for us. So we need to grow that sense of ownership. And that means focusing on the businesses that we currently have and putting the mechanisms in place to help them grow, to give them the support, to give them the access to finance where that's necessary, to give them the confidence then to grow in Wales as Welsh-owned businesses. And we have a number of proposals in order to do that. Graeme mentioned that Scotland kept its regional development agencies. We are proposing to bring back the Development Agency for Wales, because I think it has been a problem for us not having that focus, business-led, arm's length from government in creating economic growth. We have the building blocks, but we need a new focus. And with that development agency, a different balance to what the old development agency did, which was too much towards foreign direct investment. Still need that, but focusing on those Welsh businesses and how we help them to grow.
That's interesting. What's the kind of key problem with when businesses get sold outside of Wales for you? Is it because to push back on that, some people might say, well, that's just more kind of capital coming in, but I guess you've got questions about control, you've got questions about kind of commitment to the local.
Commitment is very, very important, and the businesses that are likeliest to invest within their workforce to make plans for the long term in Wales are businesses that are genuinely rooted. And in fact, when we get foreign direct investment, we want to help them build local supply chains in order to help them put roots down. There's a company in my constituency, Marco cable management, and they grew very quickly on Anglesey, a kind of a rural area where it's difficult to get businesses to set up, and they sold out to a company from West Midlands, I believe. Within months, they had closed their Llangefni manufacturing centre, and they'd got rid of their competition. We are in deep trouble if we don't care about wanting to increase the ownership of businesses in Wales and helping them put down roots.
It's something I think we'll come back to. One of the topics I definitely have is kind of global trade, and I think we may come back to touch on this. But moving along to you, Lorena, thank you so much for joining us in London. The panel have come from far and wide, but you've come from furthest. Can you react to what you're hearing here? You've got a wealth of experience both from your own region, but also via your alliance across countries that have stronger sense of devolution. What's kind of best practice to enhance growth in a devolved region?
In most of, IFA is present in 39 parties in 19 states in Europe. And in most of the devolved territories, SMEs are the bulk of the economy. SMEs are the engine of our own economies. So, of course, our institutions should be there to provide as much stability as possible, but also to provide as much transparency as possible so that the businesses can participate in decision making. That is very important. In the Basque Country, we are used to it because cooperation is in our DNA. And you probably know we have this specific fiscal system, and that is in the end the backbone of our economy. I know that abroad, our fiscal system is something that everybody wished to have. But we have things to say about it because, yes, there are two important things to say. The Basque fiscal system, it is not only one system. We have 4 different systems in the south. And by the way, they are recognized by the European Union. The European Union recognizes 27 fiscal systems plus the 4 Basques in total. So we are for devolution and cooperation. In our system, which comes from the 13th century, the most important thing is that it is rooted in historical rights. So I think that all of our territories have their historical rights to be respected by the states in which we are living now. And the second thing is that we decided to implement unilaterality because we decided about the years, and particularly since 1979, after Franco died, we decided to collect the taxes. And if the Spanish economy goes better than ours, we do not get any compensation. So it was a unilateral risk that we assumed. That is why, for example, the Catalans decided not to go into that in 79 because they thought it was too risky. But in the end, it has been proven by facts that when you give tools to our territories, it can be very profitable. Why? Because we can decide on the income tax and corporation tax. We only decide on 33% of all the taxation. We collect all the taxes. Only 33% we decide on our own. We can fix the level of taxation. You do so in Scotland. But the problem that we have now is that even if we collect a lot of taxes, then the decisions that we want to implement, for example, minimum wage, the Basque Country has a higher standard of living, but the minimum wage is still a Spanish competence. Yeah. So they fix the minimum wage at the level for the average in Spain, which is detrimental to us because the minimum wage for them it's too low for us. So we have a lot of examples where it could be improved, and we keep working with the Spanish authorities to improve our system.
That's really interesting. Thank you. I really want to come back to something that Chelsea mentioned, which is talent and skills, particularly because I'm motivated by this growing problem we have of the needs. But given that we've gone into it, let's just dig into fiscal, because it's a big part. So by fiscal, we basically mean tax and spend. It's one of these sort of annoying jargon words that economists use. The important thing to know is that the UK is one of the most centralised countries in the world. Just around 5% of tax is raised locally. So in France, it's 14%. Germany, US is more like a third, so sort of around 33 to 35%. So we live in quite a kind of extreme end of the spectrum. Chelsea, I'll start with you. From a business perspective, you mentioned that the costs to you as an entrepreneur. What are the key kind of taxes that you think could be done in? Well, I don't know. Is it a lower rate? Is it more simplification? What is that? What is it? And I will ask you to try and consider. We must all try and consider the fact that we do need to keep tax revenue up for public services. So we can't just go for a big slash. But like, what things would you kind of improve?
I definitely think business rates is definitely up there for a lot of SMEs. They feel hard hurt by those. But you mentioned simplification. I think that's a biggie too. I mentioned earlier that, you know, a lot of businesses feel like their cash flows are pinched, their business rates are too high, their overheads are too high. I think it's a mixture of all of them. And I think one of the biggest things around taxes in general for lots of SMEs is just the uncertainty of, are they going up, and then are they going up again, and are they going to continue going up? Just touching on what you said there. So uncertainty just drives lots of short-term decisions from business owners and kind of deteriorates long-term planning for skills and, you know, that growth part. So I definitely think the simplification part, but business rates is definitely within my community of SMEs something that crops up time and time again. And bigger than that, regardless of kind of what tax it is, it's more the uncertainty of what direction that's going. PAYE was a biggie for lots of people back last year. So yeah, I think it's an amalgamation of all of them, and I think that's simplification would definitely help.
Okay, thank you. Rhun, can we talk a little about Barnet and maybe kind of explain to the audience a little bit about the idea and also the problem as you see it?
Fundamentally, there is, I think, a problem with the way Wales is financed, and we used to talk almost exclusively around Barnet, which is the formula that is decades old and has long been discredited as a means to share out money to Wales, to Scotland, to Northern Ireland, based on decisions that the Treasury makes on spending for England. And it has been for many, many years thought that this is not kind to Wales. It's actually not unkind to Scotland, fair to say. I'm not in the business of trying to strip Scotland of cash. I am in the business of wanting to make the case for a fair system for Wales. There have, in fact, been some changes in recent years, which means it is less unfair to Wales now. But I do believe that there needs to be a reassessment of needs, and all the evidence that I see suggests that Wales would benefit from a proper needs assessment. But actually, it's more now than about Barnet, because there are lots of other funding streams that Wales suffers as a result of, which are not Barnetised, things that are not devolved at all. The most prominent in political discourse in Wales currently is the way railways are funded. Now, HS2 has become a very hot topic amongst very young people in Wales who now understand through the fact that there's a multi-billion pound rail project in England, which is designated as being for England and Wales, even though there's not a single centimetre of the track in Wales that Wales ends up paying for. Now, because it's England and Wales, Scotland are given compensation. Here's some money for you to make up for the fact that we're building this railway line in England and Wales, and Northern Ireland gets some money too. We don't. And in fact, as funding goes up on HS2, and incidentally, the new line between Oxford and Cambridge, which is another few £billion, and incidentally, the Northern Powerhouse Rail, which is more billions of pounds, money left to spend on rail in Wales goes down. Now, that's not Barnet, but it's another injustice in the way the Treasury mechanisms for funding the UK are devised. The answer for that is to devolve rail to Wales, as it is to Scotland, and make sure that we get our share of rail funding. And there are other examples too of the way that we need a fundamental reassessment of the way money at the centre in this most centralised of states, as you say, acts in a way which starts to give more justice.
And one of the linking to Scotland, we have got to go for dinner afterwards, so we need to kind of get to the bottom of this fight. Linking to Scotland. Now, of course, if a state needs money, you can raise taxation, or as is the way in G7 economies, you can borrow. And some really interesting developments in Scotland coming up, Graeme, with the development of so-called kilt bonds. Are people calling them kilt bonds in Scotland, or is that just annoying people in London?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So Scotland is going to develop its own bond issuance. Okay, and that's another thing that Wales doesn't have. Could you tell us a little bit about how that's going, what the plans are, and so on?
Yeah, so after the independence referendum, Scotland had quite a lot of fiscal devolution, so around income tax, social security, various other small elements of taxation. But one of the big things was the ability to borrow capital projects to top up Barnett formula and to invest in projects and to pay that back over time. And the two ways that the government can do that is they could either borrow from the Treasury and they could pay that money back, or they could borrow from the market. And they've never tried to go out to the market before, but the government have come forward with a plan. They've got a rating from the ratings agencies, and they're exploring the opportunity to issue a Scottish bond. And there's kind of a bit of a reason why they're doing it, but also some of it is more presentational in the sense that the rules for Scotland are fixed about how much they can borrow. So they can't borrow additional money over and above what they could borrow from Treasury. But what they can do is borrow more flexibly. So they can, instead of paying down the capital as well as paying interest, which they do at the moment with Treasury, they could move to a more flexible, say, a bullet payment where you don't pay up the capital, you just pay the interest, and then you pay off the debt at the end. But it gives you more flexibility if you want to invest in infrastructure projects.
Yeah, so, we're at the LSE, we're allowed to be kind of geeky and talk about finance. This is the sort of area where the detail really matters, right? So what you're saying there is the limit is 500 million, I think was the limit. So you've got 500 million on the current system. You borrow to build a new part of a new rail system. Rail systems cost more than that. You have to pay back the interest and the capital over the life of that. So that's going to massively constrain your fiscal position and how much you can actually invest. Whereas what you're saying is that what seems like a small tweak, it's essentially going from a kind of repayment mortgage to more of an interest-only mortgage. The whole of that 500 can potentially be spent. So it can give you quite a big kick. So these are the kind of the seemingly small things, I would say, in devolution that can actually make a really big difference.
And that flexibility is very important too. And on top of Barnett and what could come to us for rail, we also have the powers in Wales to issue bonds, but we don't have the flexibility in order to do that in a useful way. Plus, borrowing limits are too low, so you end up in a situation where, in principle, you have the ability to issue bonds, but in practical terms, you don't. In the same way as we have, in principle, the ability to vary income tax in Wales, but because we don't have the more nuanced powers to set bands and thresholds, they end up being fairly unusable powers. We need that full suite of tools at our disposal to, for example, build an income taxation system that works for Wales, rather than try to fit Wales's economic situation into the same model as that used in the southeast of England.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we should measure the cost of non-devolution, because it is expensive when you do not implement devolution, as we should measure the cost of not investing in protecting all inequalities and vulnerabilities, because poverty is very expensive. So when we talk about taxation and taxes, in fact, we need to think about what for. Why do we need taxes? Because we need better public services and because we need to pay attention to the most vulnerable of our societies. I always say that those most vulnerable, in the end, they are the mirror in which our societies should look at. Because if we do not do anything, we will go down the drain, all of us. So some people think that, you know, when you are in government, you rule for a few, but I think that you need to rule for all, taking into account everybody. And that is why redistribution of taxes is a fundamental principle.
And in your deep experience, and briefly, if you will, because audience, I'm going to come to you soon, so start getting your questions ready. What is the sort of fundamental or the core thing? You say the cost of non-devolution. Is it the distance between the person making the policies decision and the actual, you know, human beings that those policies affect? Is it better information? Like, what is the sort of fundamental thing?
It is a mix of everything, because we are all, as we were saying, it's not that we are all for SMEs, it is that SMEs are in our territories. And SMEs are smaller, but they know better the territory. And if they get our help, then they stay, they will never move. In my region, we have problems now with multinationals, because with the crisis, and imagine now with the oil crisis that we could again live with the Iran question, multinationals can like that go away, very far away to India, for example. So I think that devolution is, you know, the best way to have your citizenship active, because they know that if they do or propose things, they have a chance to see it, to see the results of their proposals. Whereas if you depend on the state sometimes, for us, in our case, it is Madrid and Paris, but for many other of our parties, the capitals are really far away. We have a party, for example, in the north of Greece, but decisions are taken, Turkish minority, the decisions are taken in Athens. They have nothing to do. They do not know the territory. You know, some civil servants have no clue about our territories, and they take averages, as I was saying before, that do not work at home. So I think that we have the right to decide on our own matters, on everything.
I'll give you another example. If you think of the Crown Estate as a sort of fiscal tool, we want the Crown Estate devolved to Wales, not just because we want the money raised currently in Wales and through our natural resource coming to Wales, rather than going to the Treasury and to the royal family. It's not just that we want that same amount of money coming to Wales, but Wales would be more motivated to maximise the potential of that natural resource more than an England and Wales Crown Estate ever would. Our part of the overall total is less consequential for the current Crown Estate. If we were in control of it, we would want to make the most of it. And I think that, again, is a good reason to bring decision-making around taxation and other fiscal areas closer to home.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. And that's a very, you know, this is the name of this university. That's a very economic perspective, isn't it, Graeme? You know, if the alignment of incentives with the ownership of things, we see all sorts of problems where ownership and decision making are not aligned, not in politics and all over the economy where we have those problems. I want to come back to skills, though, so important. What do you see as the need? Currently, you're somebody who is looking out there for staff, people to hire. What's the big need for the next generation that you see, and what are the policies that are needed?
Advertising is probably more heavily hit with people from Wales coming to London than ever. I have a team of 21. That is big team size. Probably in Wales, you've got your freelance support, you've got us that are kind of mid-size, and then you've got your big agencies that are 100, 200 people strong and end up being part of a much bigger organization. We really struggle with talent retention. So we will train people up, we will invest in them in the same way as our counterparts, maybe in London, let's say, the same courses, the same training, and then they will inevitably end up in London anyway.
And is that a question of salaries?
It's a question of
Lifetime?
salaries, it's a question of salaries, it's a question of the big city as
Yeah.
well. There's a big pool there, and a lot of the much bigger advertising agencies are here. There's very, very few. There's probably one I can think of that has run a Coca-Cola ad from Wales. So we lose a lot of talent. And you know, I'm a very proud Welsh woman. 90% of our book is Welsh businesses or brands coming into Wales. And there are some really, really exciting things to be done in Wales, but you do have this kind of pool of thinking, are my staff looking elsewhere? There's probably 2 in my team I can think of right now that would, you know, have got their eyes set on, you know, a publisher in London that eventually they want to move across to. And I think Gen Z are very, very clear at making what they want to do very, very obvious too. And they're quite open about saying, you know, my end goal is to go to London and beyond. So I definitely think that more needs to be done around retaining talent, not just internally, but from a salary perspective. But also as an agency, we've just entered into kind of doing more public sector work, and public sector work in Wales is noted as kind of keep the lights on money. The contract values are much more of that than our smaller public sector, kind of private sector clients. And one of our biggest frustrations is Welsh contracts ending up when there's a Welsh agency or any Welsh supplier that's able to fulfill that contract to a fantastic standard, that contract will then be awarded to someone in Scotland, for example, or in London, for example. When we talk about sustainability, it's absolutely not sustainable for someone from Scotland to fly down and take some videography, for example. So that's definitely one of the kind of examples for us where we've kind of found that slightly hard hitting, but you know, I don't think we'll ever solve that retaining 100% of our workforce, but I know that there is an absolute want for Welsh talent to stay in Wales, but sometimes they do feel forced out.
That's really important. Can I open it up to the rest of the panel? I think there are 2 really interesting things here I like views on. First is the talent question, but second, the question of the purchasing role of the state and whether we should have, and I don't think this is just a Welsh thing. I think the UK as a whole, we're constantly putting things out to tender and giving them to international company. Maybe that's great. They gave the best cost pitch. Maybe there are costs there. You know, what's the right balance? Where should we be?
I mean, two issues there. I can't agree more on those 2 issues that you've raised. We have, and you know, going into this election, we're talking about certainly on the procurement front that there is too much of the Welsh pound that Welsh government is not doing more to keep in Wales, and we think raising the share of the procurement power of Welsh government that stays in Wales from around the sort of mid-50s to something realistic like 70 to 75% could help businesses like yours, but maybe create as many as 50,000 jobs in Wales. If you look at sort of 2,000 jobs per 1% increase in procurement spend being a figure that's often referred to. But on that talent front, when you look at higher education, for example, currently a lot of money leaves Wales with students, with government essentially telling our young people, leave, go on, we'll pay you, and we don't care if you come back or not. Now, I've no interest in stopping students from Wales studying wherever they want in the world, and 2 of my own children have studied in England. But to have a government saying goodbye and we don't care if you ever come back is a major, major problem that we need to resolve. We need to incentivize young people to want to contribute to the economy. We need to show that we value our young people and that we want to build careers for them that they can prosper in. These are major issues, but I agree. People will travel. I did myself, but we surely have to do more to incentivize at least coming back or staying.
Yeah,
I do think as well, just on that point, I do think it is about the opportunity within Wales as well. So you can look at lots of different opportunities for, again, I'll talk from an advertising perspective, the range of creative opportunities that there are in Wales versus the rest of the UK. And that's not because we don't have really creative ideas here, it's because businesses don't want to fund them and they don't have the money to spend on these campaigns that are big and creative and exciting. Everything sometimes is like, okay, we'll start with this budget and then it ends at this budget because of whatever else might have impacted that. So I sometimes don't think it is all about the salaries, and I do think that it is based on the opportunities that are in Wales too, and that is fully because of the businesses either wanting to invest in the business and grow and scale and create those opportunities, or they're saying, no, we're still in survival mode and actually we just don't have a capital fast enough.
Then we're back to the beginning of the need to grow Welsh businesses.
Okay, so it's 7:10 already. I should have said at the start, we've got drinks and nibbles outside. Not only that, and it has taken quite some organising, we've got Scottish and Welsh nibbles outside. So I want to get...
Are there square sausages?
There are no square sausages. There are no law.
Are there Welsh cakes?
I don't know if that... There aren't healthy snacks, but there are snacks. So I want to open it up to the audience now. Graeme, I'm going to let you quickly come in. So get your questions ready. There's loads already. Do you mind?
Just a really quick question. I mean, we've spoken quite a lot about the opportunities with devolution, but I think we have to be honest as well that there are risks.
Yeah.
And if you look at a live debate in Scotland at the moment on taxation, the government introduced a new system for income tax. They created 6 bands in Scotland now. So we have a starter rate, a basic rate, a higher rate, intermediate rate, advanced rate, top rate. So it's much more complicated. And it means that the median taxpayer in Scotland pays ever so slightly less than the rest of the UK. But once you move above that, you start paying a higher rate of income tax quite quickly. So if you're earning £50,000, so not a huge salary, but if you're earning £50,000 in Scotland, you pay about £1,500 more in income tax than in the rest of the UK. So there is a debate. It's not, you mentioned, do you use tax do you cut tax? Do you make it more simplified? That might not be the case. You might move in a different direction. But I think one of the interesting experiences from Scotland is that the government have raised revenue, but they're actually making about half the net additional revenue they hope to get because the economy is not performing as well as the rest of the UK. So there's a risk.
Okay.
You get a reward, but there's also a risk comes with devolution.
Yeah. Lorena,
retaining just a couple of sentences about retaining talent. It is incredible because it is happening everywhere, and that talent goes normally to the capital first or other capitals, big capitals. So territories are left aside. And in fact, the capitals should realize that if they help our own territories and our devolved territories also, if they invest at home to give decent salaries, particularly not only to young in general, but to women also, because do not forget that women are always the last in the ladder. So if they invest more in the youth and women, then giving decent salaries, then they could afford housing and the rest. There are a lot of problems that come because of a bad salary and precarity in general. But really, this thing about in Spain, we have proven that by facts. When the territories around Madrid are devolved and are working well, in their economies are good, then the whole of Spain goes better. So it is not that devolution is against central state or whatever, and even independence. No, it is about collaboration for a better state for everybody.
Okay, thank you. Okay, audience questions. Let's go. There's a gentleman in the middle with a white or pink shirt here. Sorry if that's just my eyes.
I think it's pink, yeah.
It is.
Yeah, thank you very much, talking about. Obviously, UK government are now doing industrial strategy again. I mean, Mr. Iorwerth, are you interested in industrial strategy? And if so, which sectors are you particularly interested in? I mean, I think UK government has been criticised for sort of spreading the jam too thinly across 8 sectors. Obviously, Wales can't afford to do that. So I'm interested in sort of where do you think Wales can compete globally and really sort of have some growth?
Yeah,
what I'll do, if it's okay, because I can see loads of hands go, we'll collect them in threes and then we'll go. So there's Will at the front here, who's got a question. And then a gentleman at the very back wearing a black top with a red watch who had his hand up high. Yeah. Thank you.
Will Page, fellow at LSE. I've long believed that what matters most in economics is measured least by statisticians, namely human capital. And Western economies make it harder and harder to compete for human capital by their visa restrictions. Yet in Denmark, if you study at a Danish university, you get 3 years guaranteed to live and work in Denmark. It's genius. Do you think the devolved economies of Basque, Scotland and Wales could break rank and make it easier to compete for human talent?
Great question. Thank you. Yeah, in the back.
Thank you. Thank you for the talks. Sorry, I have a sore throat. This is just a question. I think it's really to Lorena, but I'd welcome the others' point of view. If in the next general election, there is the appetite for more devolution, what reforms would be needed for the devolved parliament, so the Senedd and the and Holyrood, to accommodate the fiscal devolution you want?
Okay, so industrial strategy, human capital, and then the most important forms of devolution that might be coming up either in the Welsh or Scottish Parliament. So who wants to go first on those?
Happy to answer the first question directed at me. Yes, very interested in industrial strategy, talking very recently with people involved in advanced manufacturing in Wales and how we bring a new Welsh focus to growing advanced manufacturing. I think we can look at a number of sectors that we know we can build on. I mean, there's massive excitement, I think, around what's happening in advanced semiconductors in the southeast of Wales, cybersecurity. There's a really strong base there. And again, when it comes to attracting and keeping talent, we have real opportunity to grow that skills pipeline around that sector. Aviation, obviously, up in and Airbus being very, very important too, but also other sectors. Agri-tech speaks to sort of rural Wales and what we can do. Renewables, probably should have mentioned that one first, using our natural resources as community capital as well as economic capital. And there are things that perhaps have fewer notes on them, but describe the kind of nation that we want to be economically. So when I look at the creative industries and the lack of investment that there's been in that and what that could say about Wales's ambition. So yes, very much interested in having that proper strategy. And I know that we have those sectors, including in advanced manufacturing, semicon, renewables, that are already very, very dynamic. And there's a lot of money that is ready to invest in them if they have the right government support too.
Okay. Yeah, can't go.
Yeah, so just on the couple of points, yeah, industrial strategy is interesting. I mean, one of the really interesting things when you have devolution is that, particularly if you're looking at that at a city level, you've got an extra layer of negotiation or coordination to come through, which is a complication. So people in Manchester look enviously at Scotland for the devolution that we have, but people in Scotland look enviously at Manchester for the city region devolution that they have there. And there's just that added layer of complexity about how do you get, if it's industrial strategy for the UK, but you've got different governments with different levers, how do you get that coordination there? I don't think we've really thought about how that would work under devolution. On the point about post-study work visas, we did have that in the early years of devolution, and it was successful. It's interesting, there is pretty much consensus across most policymakers and politicians in Scotland for some form of graduate visa scheme, but the politics have never really been able to make it happen. The technical reasons are actually pretty much gone now, because everybody in Scotland now has a taxpayer identification that you're Scottish. So you can check whether someone is still working in Scotland on post visa. I mean, just very quick point about powers and what reforms are needed. I mean, one of the things I don't think we've got right yet in Scotland is that with all this fiscal devolution, how do you improve the power of the Parliament to do proper scrutiny of effective government fiscal policy and economic policy? To be fair, the transfer powers have gone remarkably well in terms of how the government have operationalised that. But if you look at how the Parliament functions, about the strength of the committee structures, not as strong as they are here in Westminster. If you look at the time and the organisation of how debates are run, they're not as effective as they could be. One of the real problems that we've got at the moment is a large number of women leaving Parliament at this time around, because effectively the way Parliament is set up is not effective for people with caring responsibilities or people with families, and that disproportionately impacts this time round on MSPs. So there's a bit about this Parliament and devolution was meant to do things differently, but actually, if you look at where the Parliament's operating, it's not worked.
Thank you. I'm going to collect some more, and then I'm going to ask Chelsea and Lorena to come in. So there's a lady with a black top in the middle here. So yeah, along there, she's got her hand out. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for the talks. A less maybe economics focused question, but it relates to economies in the devolved nations, which is why I was interested. So I work in health, so I think when I was listening to your talks, I was thinking with a health lens, and obviously health systems are different in the devolved administrations. There are, you know, different powers that you have there, and with that, there's different funding mechanisms, and you know they have their own economies. So research and development funding is separate. You know, have separate systems in place, and obviously, for example, in Scotland, you've got minimum unit pricing that's separate. That's going to have economic impact. You know, thinking about public health. So I was just wondering, are there learnings you can take from the health systems being devolved and having their own or greater authority and power there that you think could be kind of really beneficial in taking across if there was, you know, like able to get larger power in devolution economics?
That's great. Thank you. And then Simon, who's just there, if you want to put your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to ask a question mainly aimed at Rhun about the culture and functioning of Welsh government in relation to business and the economy. I mean, it might be worth pointing out that we could take as a starting point here that it's only a couple of weeks ago that the First Minister said that our current finance minister is not much interested in the economy. But, you know, I'm involved in both small business and social enterprise, and I find increasingly that the relationship with Welsh government is one of where you experience sluggishness, risk averse, and there's a lack of willingness to engage with both business and wider civil society as a whole. When I look at examples like the Basque Country, for example, we see a much more entrepreneurial state and a feeling that it's much easier to get things done. So I guess the challenge for you, Rhun, is how do we change that culture and actually release a lot of the talent that I see on an everyday basis in Wales from what is a kind of top-down bureaucratic sludge that is holding us back.
And then one more, and then I'll get some answers. We've got Alexander, who's down here at the front. Put your hand up.
Thanks very much. Given the sun's finally come out, I guess tourism isn't far from people's thoughts, particularly if you're sitting in London and it's been raining for a long time. So I just want to ask a question. There is a question here, isn't there, for both Scotland and Wales around how do you get the tourism policy and financial framework right? What you don't want to have is people forced out of homes because of second home ownership. But you also want to attract in tourist pounds to be spent.
Yep.
So I just wondered, any reflections? I'd be interested also from a private sector perspective on that and the comparative perspective. How do you get that mix right of visit Wales and visit Scotland saying, come on in, but also making sure that inward visitation isn't at the expense of Welsh or Scottish citizens?
Brilliant. We've got some huge questions here. So health, culture, tourism, still some unanswered. Just to give the panel notice, we've got about 10 minutes left. And then we're going for those snacks and drinks, I promise you. So don't try and answer them all and answer them relatively. Actually, Chelsea, do you want to come in first? Because there are a couple that related to business there.
Yeah, I will. I wanted to touch on, someone asked a question earlier around retaining talent. And there's a great example in Wales, it's a previous question, but I thought I'd chip in. There's a company called Butte Energy in Wales who have they're onshore wind company, whether you agree with it or not. They have done an exceptional job with a youth advisory board, and it is a really, really great example. 5 out of, I think, 6 of the people on that board that are all under 25 are from Wales, left Wales to study and came back to Wales for a job and to join that board. And that is a real testament to what they've built there, but also they've created the opportunities there to attract the talent back with salaries, with opportunity, and with a future of a job in renewable energy. So I just want to check that out there, because there are, sometimes it sounds like a little bit of a sob story, but there are some companies that are doing it very, very well and trying to retain talent back. The Visit Wales question is probably my favourite question to date, because that tender for Visit Wales and the campaign that is going to be now for the next 5 years has just been released. So every advertising in and outside of Wales is now scrambling and having a look at their best creative ideas for that. My personal opinion and my team's opinion is that we don't platform Wales as much as we should right now. If you go to Dublin and you get off the plane and you look at all of the advertising around what you can do in Dublin, the history, the heritage, the culture, it's so much more than just drinking a pint of Guinness. And the communication and the messaging of that is absolutely excellent, from the minute you get off the plane all the way through to your hotel room and beyond. And I do feel like we've missed the mark slightly with Wales. There is so much heritage in Wales. It's more than castles, it's more than Welsh cakes, even though I keep talking about them. But there's so much more deep rooted in Wales that we really need to pull out and storytell. St. David's Day, I feel like there was much more of a buzz yesterday than there has been previously, but that storytelling piece we need to be much, much, much better at. It might be a case that, you know, the same campaigns have been rerun over time and time and time and time again, and that's what they've been happy with. But I think now is a real turning point of, there is much more of a feel in Wales that we need to be presented much more on a global stage, especially with conversations around devolution, to actually back ourselves and have our own comms out there that translates to why we should bring more tourism into Wales, especially including rail.
Yeah, Rhun, come in.
Okay, so I'll go through a few of those questions. Marnie, thanks for the question on health. I mean, the key thing to me is how we get more bangs for our bucks. Half the Welsh budget goes on health. You could spend it all on health if you spend it badly, and you still wouldn't get a better result. So it's all about more effective spending of the money, and the key shift that we want to start doing is away from the expensive end of health over time to a more preventative agenda and to primary care. It's difficult because the expensive end is a problem that's not going anywhere now, but preventative is the key there. On culture, sorry, I couldn't agree more with you. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do with the new development agency, resetting, if you like, that sense of, you know, lack of trust, I feel now, between business in Wales and Welsh government, making business have a sense that it has more influence, and that we're bringing more agility into decision making within government, that I think is really really important. So very much we need a reset. Tourism, I mean, it's a massively powerful export product that we have. You know, tourism in Wales. It's, you know, I represent a constituency that's one of the hotspots of tourism. I want to make more out of tourism, but there's no escaping the fact that it's a product that has an impact on people's lives, and the loss of housing to tourism is something that we can't just allow to happen. And in fact, we just can't allow tourism to be something that just happens to us. So it's about regaining control over that product, giving more of a sense of ownership to communities over tourism. The tourism levy that's being brought in Wales is something that I've always supported. Why wouldn't we want to make sure that we have that explicit raising of revenue through tourism, but you spend it in a way that does two things: gives tourists a better experience. I go to Germany, I get free bus travel when I pay my tourism levy. I think, you know, that's a positive thing. But we also spend on mitigating the negative impacts of tourism on communities. You know, communities where there are lots of holiday lets are more difficult to provide public services for. So, you know, it's a real balance. And I'll go back to the first question as well on next powers to be devolved to Wales. Justice and policing is an absolute no-brainer. Rail is a very, very important one too. There are some other things also. Broadcasting, for example.
Brilliant. Great. We'll just Graeme and Lorena. Yeah, Lorena, you go next.
Yeah, I will start with tourism. I totally agree with you. The problem is not really tourism, but over-tourism. And there are several places, like in Friesland, in the north of the Netherlands, or in Brittany, in the Balearic, where they are implementing the status of resident. So they are giving residents a special status so that they have priority when buying, for example, or changing their homes. And then, of course, taxing more for second residencies. If you have enough money to have a second residence, then you pay more for that second residence. In Catalonia, in Barcelona, they have put limits also to the rents and to Airbnbs to try to combat agencies like Airbnb and gentrification. So we need to be active and put limits on that, because otherwise our own people are suffering from over-tourism. About competencies, well, I think that, justice, of course, in the Basque Country, justice is devolved, education is devolved, and NHS is devolved. But even if it is devolved, and it has been devolved for 47 years, now we are in crisis in the three sectors. Why? Because even if we manage our own those three sectors, we have not been investing enough in the sectors and not with efficiency. And we have not been taking attention to the next generation having employment. Our doctors are too old, and there's no room for the new ones. And the young ones leave the Basque Country, and the same happens with teachers and the rest. So we really need to keep investing, but in an efficient way. About care, it is a whole chapter. I think that we should introduce the notion of human care. We're talking about people, and we're talking about not only care depending on employment or money, but on decent employment and taking care of people in a human way, and investing, because even in the Nordic countries where they were good at it, if you do not invest, then we lose, and that the welfare state can be very quickly undermined. And about fiscality in general, fiscal policy, okay, but fiscal justice first.
Thank you. Graeme.
So I was just going to, the really interesting question about the sludge, and then also the kind of NHS in there. And I think what's quite interesting from the Scottish devolution experience is that the sludge is much more difficult to get through in the powers that were being devolved for a long time, that were inherited Scottish office. So we have exactly the same challenges in the NHS. There's some exceptions you mentioned about minimum unit pricing, but the same challenges about getting reform to the NHS. You contrast all that with social security and what the government have done in setting up Social Security Scotland, and actually having a blank sheet of paper to think about, well, what is the system of social security you want to have? They've been much more innovative. They've been able to do much more entrepreneurial things and have a completely different system. There's a sting in the tail, comes back to my point about risks. It costs more money, but they've been able to do things that they couldn't, for example, have done in the NHS. So there's that point about, I guess, the learning about how can you do things easier and new stuff, and it's much more difficult in the stuff that's been around for a long time.
That has been really fascinating. Thank you, panel. There are a lot more people kind of indicating their hands are going up, but I do want to end now, not least because the panel will be around for a while outside. So please come up and talk and ask your questions to them directly. Just as a concluding thought, as sort of privilege of chair, my own view is that a lot of this adds up to a completely new way actually of thinking about economics, and really as an advert for something that we're going to be doing here at the LSE, which is setting up a new institute to think about political economy. What do I mean by that? I'll just give people one thing to think about as they go out. As economists, we used to basically, this is a bit of a pastiche, Graeme, you can tell me if I'm wrong, say that you want to be open to everything. You want to be open to trade. Free trade's good. And because of that, this state, the kind of localization of the state and procuring things locally was seen as a real no-no. If you're open to trade, you just go for the cheapest international producer. And I think that's really shifted in the past 4 or 5 years in mainstream economists. And you can see it. Just go down the M4, for example. One image to bear in mind, those of you that have been to Wales or are Welsh, as you go through and you go past the Port Talbot Steelworks, you'll see the turbines up on the hill, that they're right there. You can see them. They're 100 yards away. You could throw a stone and hit them. We don't in the country, not in Wales, not in the UK, have the facility to make that type of steel. So we've done a policy which is we need more of those things, but we don't have the productive capacity to make it. And that kind of thing, which I would say 10 years ago in economics was like totally mainstream, it's great, everything's open. Clearly, with the way the globe is changing, that is changing. And we here at the LSE think that needs a new political economy, and that's something we're going to be working on. So, advert over from me. Last thing is just to say thank you to the panel. It's been fascinating. The next couple of months are going to be absolutely vital here in the UK. And thank you for coming in and telling us all about it. Thank you.